He had his gun, so he just swung it open.
I start to notice that, the atmosphere feels a little bit weird.
First thing he seen was this 6.5 foot tall, broad shoulder, dark hair. That freaked him out.
We hadn't talked to her about like life and death and what any of that means. She's 3 years old,
So we turned around. Suddenly there's a whole tree falling across the road.
And she was describing to us that, there was a deceased person that she could see visually.
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, where we tackle the ever-expanding history and mystery of monsters and supernatural madness every Monday and Friday. You can find us at CryptidClues.ca for more information, or even check out exclusive content such as interviews and D&D campaigns at patreon.com/CryptidClues. Welcome to Cryptid Clues, everybody. I'm your host, Reuben Olson, joined by your other also host, Taylor Field. Today's episode hopefully won't feature that creepy TikTok angel tune that sends shivers up my spine, but is actually just a cat crying in slow motion, since we're going to be talking about wacky races of angelic beings. But before Be Not Afraid, head on over to CryptidClues.ca. Ask us questions over at our email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. And if you like what you hear, support us on Patreon for $1 or more for ad-free, exclusive content and D&D episodes at patreon.com/CryptidClues. Finally, you can find us on almost all social media. So, the topic of angels is an intriguing one. From the religious standpoint, Christian and many other religions most definitely accepts the existence of a higher dimensional entity called an angel. From the not-so-religious standpoint, these higher beings could also be aliens or cryptids themselves. Let's take a crack at examining the surprisingly different and multiverse of madness-like creatures that we commonly refer to as one thing. Before I proceed, though, Taylor, I just want to get your opinion on this. I did show you something before we started the show. Before that, throwing that away, though, what is your concept of angels?
Again, my upbringing has not been that of a very religious type, but I was very much well informed of angels and demons. So my understanding of angels is that they were the acolytes of God. They were very pure, profound, and just mighty beings up in the sky, mighty, powerful spirits, forever immortal. Now, my mother she's much older now in her years, and she's very much become more onto that playing field of angels and like Archangel Michael, and just kind of really being thankful to them and praiseful for the kind of things that they have done for her and a family and everything like that. So she's very, very thankful for them. I myself, based on what you showed me, would have thought angels were very, very different. But then you showed me that footage, and that is the last thing that I would have expected. But then when you see that, my mind immediately starts connecting the dots. Like, oh yeah, you mentioned Multiverse of Madness there casually, but then I'm started thinking like, okay, other things like Illuminati, All-Seeing Eye, like what is this kind of connection with everything now? And it's a whole can of worms into this rabbit hole of like, okay, what do other people really know? Because I guarantee, at least for myself, when I'm speaking about this, most people, when you say angel, think of a guy wearing nice, shiny, white plate robes. Armor. What's that?
White robes, plate armor, sure.
Exactly, and then big two wings, the halo around their head. They just look super pure and fancy, and that's what they think they are. Not extra interdimensional being like looking creatures. And then you also have like the little baby angels, like the little cherubs or whatever you want to call them, with the little trumpet or like the little harp and the flute. Yeah. But I showed Taylor a video before we started, viewers, and it's one of the TikTok memes it's a recreation of what angels actually look like. The title was Do Not Be Afraid, and it shows a few different types of angels that the Bible describes. Very fascinating looking. Eyes everywhere, wings, everything's very bright, everything's very white. One of the
common theories as to why they appear this way, why they're described that way in the Bible, is a lot of them appear in visions and dreams, which aren't exactly the clearest. Others would suggest that these beings are interdimensional and therefore we cannot see their real form in the third dimension. And what we do get to see of them ends up looking a little messed up.
Yeah.
Much like the Multiverse of Madness, the Doctor Strange movie. You go into the mirror dimension, you go and you look at something and it warps into like a fourth dimensional thing with all these different angles and stuff that you normally can't see as a human being.
So just to interrupt, when you say that Multiverse of Madness, it blows my mind just seeing that creature and again seeing the image. There's one specific image and it's just like, man, this is really, really weird. Like, again, people, when you look at that, you're not going to think of Angel. So, I mean, I'm excited. I'm going to stop interrupting. I'm going to let you keep going in because I'm kind of compiling different questions here that I'm going to pitch to you on certain things.
I mean, one little thing just to throw us down the rabbit hole for a second is when the Bible talks about chariots of fire. And then later on, you hear about these angels that are rings of fire covered in eyeballs or lights. And then you think of UFOs today. Saucers with rings of lights around them, or sparkly things in the sky. It's just an interesting thing that we might call back to a little bit later. But I'd like to get one thing out of the way in the topic of angels here, and that's you'd think that the Bible would be our main reference point here for this episode, and it certainly plays a big part of it. But actually, one of the greatest reference points for information comes from one of the removed biblical books, the Book of Enoch. Enoch, the author, as it was ascribed to, was the great-grandfather of Noah. And this Hebrew text contains over 50 chapters containing the origins of demons, Nephilim, and angels, along with long-winded explanations as to why things are the way they are, why the biblical flood was morally necessary. And it's basically, if you look at the Bible as the main story, you have these other books that occasionally reference or talk about it, but the Book of Enoch supports it and instead says, well, this is why everything happened. This is what was going on during all of these books. Oh, this was the flood. Well, this is what was happening because of it. And it's very fascinating to read all of this lore. It's basically a big lore dump. So, off-topic reference aside, let's talk about angels, specifically the different subsets of angels. And more specifically, we're going to start off with ones that we've referenced quite a bit because it involves Nephilim, which potentially could involve Bigfoot, depending on some theories. We're going to be talking about the angels that become demons. These are called the Watchers, or the Grigori. These... Oh, Taylor, I saw you open your mouth there.
Again, I know. So I just want to confirm, they become Watchers after they're demons or before they become demons?
It's a specific species of angel that were some of the first to fall, along with Satan. So obviously, Satan was the first to fall. And after that, the world gets rolling. The Watchers were beings that were responsible for watching over the very first humans and served as guides, essentially. They were led by the highest ranked Watcher, Samyaza. However, because of the Watchers' close integration into human society in early Genesis, they soon began to develop feelings and lust after humans. With the fall of Satan, Samyaza soon joined in this rebellion against God when some of his followers asked to partake in earthly desires. Samyaza rebuked that he alone would have to take this sin to God if his followers started sleeping with human women. But some of the Watchers insisted and suggested that they would all share equal parts of their punishment. So, they organized a secret meeting with Samyaza to see who would join him in his lust for human women. Samyaza gathered 200 Watchers to meet upon Mount Hermon and organized a secret society Though he was initially doubtful that most of his followers would want to do this, and he was willing to go either way, they all decided to rebel against heaven, and he found that many of them were willing to perform an oath with him under penalty of death to plan together and use their heaven-acquired knowledge to create a counterfeit religion on earth to satisfy their lusts and carnal desires in attracting human woman. All right, that's a huge lore dump right there.
Yeah.
But you know how I've always brought up before the whole Nephilim thing, fallen angels, they mated with human woman. Well, the Book of Enoch specifically talks about that. It talks about the different races of angels. It talks about these ones, the Watchers, which were the ones that slept with human woman and that created the Nephilim by mixing their DNA with them. And of course, the Nephilim, they were the union of angels and human woman, the mythical giants and human hybrid species of old times.
So when you say that they created the secret cult or religion, what is that referring to today? Is that something that still presently exists, this group?
So essentially the Book of Enoch is stating that because of the fallen angels wanting to intermingle with human woman and basically attempt to trick people, because humans essentially in the start, Book of Genesis, all that stuff, everybody was essentially a Christian. Adam and Eve sinned. They went out, they started doing things, but everybody was aware of God. Everybody had angels around them. It was hey, there's heaven, there's God, there's one thing that we believe in, and whoops, we sinned. Well, the angels were so lustful, they couldn't just walk up to a human woman and be like, yo, want to sleep with me? Because the human woman would be like, no, that's a sin. I don't really want to do that. So they had to trick humans and essentially start teaching them, oh, well, it's not all about God. There's actually these other things. You can worship us. We can give you these things. Mm-hmm. And they ended up creating other religions about them and getting people to follow them, sleep with them, etc. So the Watchers shared with humankind various forbidden arts, sciences, and celestial secrets or mysteries of the true heavenly gnosis or knowledge, especially wisdom that was possessed by Azazel, who taught them also the secrets of magic, of war, including metallurgy and weaponry, and of seductive ornamentation, including jewelry, cosmetics, and makeup, all of which ultimately brought down the wrath of heaven upon the rebel angels and their spawn.
Interesting.
So again, huge history dump, like an almost advancement of civilization, just bam, snap of the fingers like that. And it was after this that God commanded Gabriel and Michael to slay many of these Watchers and imprison them within the earth for many generations, to then be thrown into the flood, and after that be forever punished. Samyaza and his followers begged Enoch, a holy man, to petition for their forgiveness with God. But God told Enoch he shouldn't be responsible for angels coming to him to report to God for the angels' sins. Why is he the messenger? And that the angels knew very well that this is what would happen if they chose to disobey. They were fully aware of everything because they were there from before the beginning, yet they chose to do it anyway. So there would be no forgiveness for this corruption. Now, to backtrack a little bit here, the Book of Enoch actually takes the time to name the different leaders under Samyaza and of the chiefs who took human woman for themselves. It names various Nephilim even, or demigods, I guess we could call them, and even who taught humans what, like how a Watcher angel named Penimum taught mankind to write with ink and use paper, or Kokebel, who commands 365,000 surrogate spirits that do his bidding. Go through all 200 of these beings and you have quite the list, and also a lot of questions too. Like, okay, so Earth doesn't have that many people on it yet. There's probably thousands at this point. I mean, it's the Book of Genesis, Adam and Eve. They procreated, they made a few people, and then we're getting into the times of Noah. There's cities, there's towns, there's villages. But 365,000 surrogate spirits, where did that come from?
So it's not exclusively stating human spirits. So these spirits could have been, I'm assuming, not angelic related? Or you think implying like from another planet?
I have no clue. That is a question that remains to be answered. But the fact that it's brought up so early in biblical history is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
So I've kind of opened a whole can of worms here with the Watchers, Taylor.
Yes, you have. I've spoken with a few people in my history of existence about demons and why God is the way he is, allowing things to happen the way he does. And I think that's always just kind of everyone's perspective when you are looking from the outside in on religion in a whole. Like, why does God allow the things that he does to happen? Why does he allow a kid to lose his parents in a car accident? Why does he allow that father to get sick and die and leaving his family behind? Like, there's all these questions like, why would God do that? And I don't have those answers, and no one on the planet has those answers. Well, I mean, at least.
I mean, you can get pretty close, though. My opinion on that is we are just a little blip in all of existence. And because Adam and Eve were the first ones and they decided to sin, they created evil. God was like, hey, I can either not allow these things to happen because people will eventually ask me, why do I allow these things to happen? But then you guys are nothing more than machines with no free will. And that's not really fair. So if I give you free will, but then I stop bad things from happening, that takes away your free will. So there's only one way to have free will. And to have free will is to put yourself in a state where you can allow these things to happen. And then Eve, of course, was tricked by Satan, who fell to rebel against God, to allow sin, all of knowledge and stuff like that. And then Adam and Eve were very aware of that. They lived a very long life, but then procreated and spread around the globe and created all of these little human infestations that decided to sin more and more. And then, of course, angels came into the mix and decided to intermingle, and they were doing some very evil, despicable things. And God was like, oh no, okay, we're going to flood this entire planet, do a big reset as much as we possibly can. And Noah's like, yo, there's still good people here. And God's like, okay, I'll let a few of you live. Let's see if we can at least restart a little bit better than it was before. And God does change quite a bit throughout the Bible. Quite a bit. The Old Testament God is very different from how he is in New Testament. And also the world is quite different from then too. It's very interesting to read about all this. But the concept of why God allows things to happen is really just a question of, do you want free will or not?
I like how you worded that. And it's funny because in today's society, when you think we are exercising free will, we're kind of, it seems like the powers to be are exercising the opposite of that. They're not really exercising that God complex of like, hey, you want free will? Well, then I got to just stay out of your affairs. They like nothing more than to be in your affairs. So that's, again, a different topic for today.
It's a butterfly effect. If there were only two people on the planet, God would probably step in and be like, hey, you know what? I can help out a little bit. But then you start to spread and create problems and sin. And because one person's sin makes somebody else do something bad, it eventually snowballs into this big bad thing. And there's always going to be those questions that we can't fully answer. Like, well, what about the children that come into existence and just poof, kind of like this ad break? Welcome back, everybody. That was an awful ad break. I have to apologize for that sin. I guess I'll be taking that one with me to the pearly gates.
That was so good.
But you also have to wonder, too, because God knows all. Is there a state of being where reincarnation comes into play for people that die unfairly? Is that little blip of existence really so insignificant that maybe there's people that have souls and people that don't?
Well, good plug here, actually, because we actually have an episode on reincarnation a little bit. Go check that out. That came out a few weeks ago. But kind of just to round off your question you pitched to me there initially. So these watchers...
Oh yeah, we were talking about angels, weren't we?
We were, yeah. So they had the notion of just, okay, I want to lust and have this pleasure for myself, yada, yada, yada. But then they were trading that for knowledge and giving humankind more advancements and insights into these different things.
Tricking people, essentially. Like, hey, we can give you all the stuff that we have. which is interesting to think that the angels had access to that.
That is interesting, actually, because you feel like, at least my interpretation of God is he is a very reclusive man who keeps things close to the chest in terms of knowledge. But I don't know the guy personally, but I do think it's interesting, the comparison there, where you have watchers that were trading humanity information and technology, I guess you could say, to a degree, all this kind of stuff to advance human civilization. And then when you look at conspiracy theories, people say, you know what, aliens are giving the government technology and the government is turning a blind eye to what the aliens are doing, and the aliens are doing some pretty shady things on planet Earth. And that's just an interesting comparison. If this is something that happened thousands and thousands of years ago, here it is happening again with aliens.
Or maybe it's never stopped.
Exactly, maybe it never stopped.
And, you know, we're barely scratching the surface here. So far, I have brought up the Watchers, aka the Grigori. It is fascinating to dive into the Book of Enoch and other biblical texts from the time and look at different races of angels, different species. There is a whole different dimension and world out there with all these different things, and a lot of them are brought up in the Book of Enoch, specifically one after another, too. There's like a whole section dedicated to this. We talked about the Watchers. Some good, some bad. A lot of them were fallen. We talked about how there's different ranks and different leaders. Specifically, there was Semyaza, who seemed to be the next one under Lucifer to fall. He allowed his watchers to convince him that it was okay to make a little secret society and then go intermingle with the human species, because the majority of these angels, perhaps all of them, were men, and they had the ability to reproduce. They did not need to, which is interesting. But they had the ability to reproduce, and they decided, hey, there's human woman down here. This was meant for us. We're going to just suffer for all of eternity because women are that great.
So they were all men and they had the ability to reproduce, but they did not need to. And I imagine that's because new ones could be created from God's
Or perhaps
power.
they were genderless. It doesn't really say.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, if they were able to reproduce, that would imply that there would be female equivalent watchers, but they were all men, right? Or just different species?
Perhaps that is part of it. Or there's something we also just don't understand involved with that.
Right. Yeah.
Now, moving on to another species of angel, seraphim. Seraphim are mentioned alongside cherubim in the Book of Enoch and also mentioned in the Bible in the books of Isaiah and Revelation. Seraphim are scary 6-winged creatures. 2 wings cover their faces, 2 cover their feet, and 2 are used for flight specifically. They have hands, and one in particular seraphim performs a small ritual to use coal and assure Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6 that he is cleansed of his sin. Almost like the ritual itself wasn't needed to cleanse him of sin because he asked for it, but he wanted to have some kind of physical thing done to him. So the seraphim was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to take this coal. I'm going to touch it to your lips. Bam. There you go. We did something physical. You're free of this. You're cleansed of your sin. Seraphim are mentioned as not having the status of angels. And also, perhaps, this is where things start to get really interesting. Not the essence of free will. Seraphim exist seemingly to fulfill certain purposes. They sing, and they enjoy doing work nearby the throne of God. They are never seen or mentioned away from the throne or interacting or doing anything else besides specifically being around the throne. And at one point, Isaiah goes up there and is like, yo, I've sinned. And some seraphim come down, and one of them in particular does a little thing to make him feel happy. Now, mentioned alongside this, well, sorry, you can go ahead.
Sorry. So they're kind of like I don't want to say pre-programmed. That's poor word use for an angel. But
no, that's exactly what it sounds like to me.
That is, okay.
They're basically programmed. Mm-hmm. Another probably programmed species is cherubim, which are mentioned 33 times in the Old Testament, not just in the Book of Enoch. They aren't exactly the small floating baby angels you would think they are. They have a generally human form covered by 2 wings, while 2 others are used to fly, and are capable of expressing the faces of different animals, oftentimes displaying more than one face at a time. One such cherub is described as having the face of a man, a lion, an eagle, and a cherub all at once, implying that a cherub's face isn't a human face or any animal face, but its own specific thing, but can also display a man, lion, and eagle, different angles, kind of like a weird dimensional thing, all at once. Cherubim specifically are guards and are particularly useful in that nature as they are given swords of fire to wield when given a guarding task. When Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God sends a cherubim to guard the path to the tree. Cherubim are also mentioned as being around the throne of God with seraphim and some other angelic beings, and are also accompanied by spinning wheels of fire, which are also a different species altogether. You can see the can of worms starting to just unleash all these things. So, one interesting thing to note is how important status is with all these things too. So you have the seraphim, they have their singular purposes, they sing praise and they can talk and do tasks. You also have the cherubim, which are below the throne of God, almost like supporting it. And they also are accompanied by spinning wheels of fire. And they are also very rarely, if ever, mentioned away from the throne of God. Now, yet another type of angel is an Ophanim, which has become a horrifying meme. This is one of the ones I showed you that video of. You see that many-eyed wheelie being with the creepy sound. It's an Ophanim, always watching. And it's interesting to note that this isn't one that's necessarily always around the throne of God. They are there, but they have a much bigger purpose as well. They're described as more of a scribe. These beings are assigned to every single soul and act as the eyes of God, perhaps. They record and account for good deeds in the Old Testament times, but when a human sins, they become an angel of punishment and instead record the bad deeds committed and punishments they accrue. If a human repents, they blot out the sin, no questions asked, and carry on accounting for the good. Ophanim are incapable of sleep and are always watching, always aware. They are capable of speaking to their humans, but it is rare for these occurrences to not be superseded by a higher ranked angel when required.
So this is an equivalent of good karma, bad karma.
Essentially, it's an all-watching eye.
Right.
But a whole bunch of eyes all at once, always awake and alert. And there's a whole whackload of them everywhere at all times.
Is there any, like I mentioned this prior, any weird conspiratorial connection between the all-seeing eye and then this angel?
That, honestly, is an excellent question. Considering that they have many eyes, I don't know why there's only one all-seeing eye, if that's supposed to represent maybe God or something else, but I find it interesting that these things basically just record everything, as if they are a direct link to God's vision.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like the guy or the girl typing away at the typewriter in a courtroom in front of the judge.
It is. And I mean, there's lots of mention of people trying to hide things from God, or even the angels when they fall, trying to form a secret society and keep things away from the watchful eyes of God. But God is all-knowing. He is watching everything. And you are technically all-knowing if you have eyes absolutely everywhere. You can't hide anything in the end. God is going to know absolutely everything over time. But in the moment, it seems like they're implying that there is a delay, in a sense. If you want to go commit a sin, you can get away with it for a teeny tiny bit before that word is then sent up the chain and reported.
Right. We'll get away with it, and then, I mean, you mean like repent, right? Just kind of like cleanse the palate a little bit? Or the slate, not palate.
Something like that. What are your thoughts so far on all of this, Taylor?
To me, it just blows my mind how what started with a lot of what you're saying here in early human civilization has been recorded down in the books and such. It's just funny how whether or not those things have transitioned into different present day I don't want to say narratives, but like, as I said, good karma, bad karma is just a modern day take on this angel you just told me about. And is it just a way of just, I don't want to say indoctrinating, but having people kind of come to terms in a modern like way of thinking to understand how these things work and just kind of like subtly go along with all these things? Because I can see where these types of topics and names and actions and mannerisms that these angels do, how those things can be compared to other interpretations that we've looked at in, the cryptid world, when we talk about aliens and paranormal. And when you see these lines from different things start to cross over into each other, it gets really interesting. And I'm a person that thought, okay, religion is totally one thing. When I've spoken to some religious people and they hear me rambling about aliens and Bigfoot, they totally shun me and disregard me. And that's fine. But now I'm starting to realize, like I've already said, there is a weird connection, like you brought up, how Nephilim and Sasquatch, and how we are just getting down this rabbit hole. So,
it is. It's a very crazy rabbit hole, and I want to expand on that rabbit hole for you right now. The Book of Enoch, a lot of its texts were derived from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are the oldest known recordings in all of human history. So you can't go much further back in time than reading these. It's also interesting to note that when you're talking about the fallen angels creating religions, and Nephilim being in the Bible mentioned as the gods of old, how these other religions could be things like Greek mythology, Norse mythology. You have Hercules, you have Zeus, you have all these watchers with various powers and controls, magic even. And then you have the demigods and these creatures that can ascend to and go down from different planes of existence as if they're coming or going from heaven or hell. And the fact that this goes back so far and is even talking about karma, recording good deeds and bad deeds and stuff like that, it almost makes a little bit too much sense. And it's kind of creepy in that fact. Now, we aren't done with the list of angels. There's a lot more, and I won't have time to cover all of them, so I brought up some pretty important ones. We've kind of been working our way down the chain. We started with the Watchers, we went to the Seraphim, the Cherubim, and the Ophidim, working our way consistently down the ranks. We're going to jump all the way to the top now and talk about archangels. So if you've ever watched Supernatural, you're aware of some of the archangels already and their relationships with each other. These are the highest order of angels and top of the angel food chain. While the Bible primarily mentions Michael, the one responsible for humanity, there are 7 archangels total, and from what it looks like they're also the most human-looking, 2 wings, armor, swords, all that good stuff. Probably capable of other forms. They can appear as light, they can appear as just a regular human being with no wings or anything angel-related at all. But let's name a few of them, and their purposes as well. Starting with the first archangel mentioned, Uriel, the holy angel of thunder and shakings. Raphael, the holy angel that guards the spirits of men. Raguel, the holy angel who executes vengeance on mankind and fallen angels. Michael, the holy angel who is guardian of the chosen people of God. Serigel, the holy angel in charge of spirits of men who cause others to sin. Gabriel, the holy angel who is in charge of serpents, the garden, and the cherubim. And Phanuel, the holy angel who is in charge of those who repent unto eternal life. It's fascinating then to dive into the meanings of their names. In ancient Hebrew texts, you can take out those different little letters and stuff and figure out what each part of their name is supposed to mean in word. Uriel means the flame of God. Raphael means the God who heals. Raguel means friend of God. Michael means who is like God. Seriguel, captain of the Lord God. Gabriel, man of God. And Phanuel, manifestation of God. Each archangel bears its own responsibilities and is also responsible for some form of command over lesser species, angel species particular. Like how I mentioned earlier, you have Gabriel, who is in charge of a bunch of things, including the cherubim. The other archangels are then responsible for other angelic species as well. And it would appear that through all of these texts that Michael has earned his place as the most important archangel, being the one responsible for the children of Israel, the one who accompanies souls to heaven, and the one who will do battle with Satan in the end times. The archangels have also been related to a lot more responsibilities, from the hours of the day to the minutes of the day to the days of the week, all taking different shifts and everything. It would appear that one of the archangels is responsible for Monday, one's for Tuesday, one's for Wednesday, one's for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then every hour of the day, they all take a different shift and they're responsible for a different hour of happenings. Each archangel is also responsible for the planets. It would seem that there's some debate on which one's responsible for which, because not all of the text is there for this. Michael appears to be the one responsible for the planet Mercury, for instance. And then there are also 4 of the top archangels in the chain here, Michael being one of them, is responsible each for one of the seasons. Now, these are the head honchos, and obviously they're all equal in terms of species, with Michael being the one that's worked his way up to the very tip top. Mm-hmm. Let's now jump from the top of the list all the way down to the bottom of the list after another ad break. Welcome back, everybody. I had to make up for the last ad break. Hopefully that one wasn't so bad. We're almost done this episode, but before we get to our closing thoughts, pardon me, other species of angels are very numerous and very mythical as well. So I wrote down a couple of interesting ones that I wanted to talk about. There are many offhand mentions to other species of angels, all of which are essentially lesser in rank than everything I mentioned so far. But underneath your archangels and watchers, you have princes, kings, and rulers, which are generic names given to both angels and demons. So it would imply then that if you are not an archangel because they're their own specific species, and you're not a watcher because they had a very important task, then you are probably in the watcher category as terms of looks and appearance, and you're either a prince, king, or a ruler. And then you have your own command over the kings below you or the rulers below you. And if you're a ruler, then you just have command over the regular angels and spirits. And these spread throughout all of the angel species and, of course, demons, since they are essentially the same thing. Intriguingly enough, the Bible directly refers to a goat demon in Leviticus, which, since some angelic beings can have the heads of animals, does not sound so surprising. It also makes me call back to what we know of the cryptid goat man. Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough. And there's also a certain point, too, where we begin to describe heavenly creatures that rarely come to Earth, but do exist in our material plane, such as Calcridri, which are described as luminescent scaled, and I use this word inappropriately. They're called something else, but I'm going to call them a dragon, because that's essentially what they look like, with many heads, or a hydra.
Okay.
Now, they are described as these luminescent, scaled beings with many long, serpent-like necks and the heads of a crocodile. That just makes me think of a dragon and a hydra.
Yeah.
These Calcridri occasionally appear near the sun when they are not in heaven. And they like to kind of float around up there and occasionally float down to our atmosphere and just float around. Fiery birds are also mentioned that suspiciously sound a lot like a phoenix, and also like to fly up close to the sun as well. They're another holy entity, and Phoenix can be seen appearing next to the throne alongside the cherubim and the seraphim and all that stuff. Now, there's other passing mentions of other fantastical creatures, but nothing that really stood out as much as the Hydra-like being did to me. So I really wanted to bring that one up. And I know this episode is about angels specifically, but it's cool to note that there's also a lot more up there too that doesn't necessarily exist on Earth, but can show itself in our realm.
Well, I've seen memes, people joking around, where you see Noah's Ark leaving away, and it's like Bigfoot and unicorns and stuff like that. Like, hey, let us on, you left without us, kind of stuff like that. Just joking around, but maybe that's the kicker. Maybe you have these very unorthodox creatures. I'm not saying Bigfoot and unicorns per se, but when you say Hydra and you say Phoenix, these more mythological type of creatures, more so than the cryptid creatures, maybe those are more commonly associated with being on that angelic tier, and they come into our realm every so often. The one that you mentioned, the Hydra coming down from the sun into our atmosphere, sounds very much like atmospheric beast sightings, which I did do an episode about that before, and people do see things going around in the atmosphere. And again, not to spoil it, but if you haven't seen Nope, go watch Nope, because that is a very, very good movie focused on that kind of thing. So
I also like that a lot of the atmospheric beings and stuff, a lot of them are described as dragons and rainbowy, luminescent, these like shiny things up in the sky that kind of wiggle around. And that's almost exactly what is described when they bring up the Chalkidri in the Book of Enoch.
it blows my mind how it this is kind of like the source material. Now, did people come up with these concepts of phoenixes and hydras and all these other crazy things from movies and media and everything? Did they come up with that based on this source material from what is described in these books? Or did they come up with this stuff based on other source material, other interactions, other things? Do they just think of it off the top of their heads? Like, where did it all stem from? Because if it didn't stem from the source material books, then it makes me wonder, okay, surely not everyone has read the Book of Enoch and all these other chapters. They must have had it somewhere. Especially
the fact that the Bible references the Book of Enoch, and then the Book of Enoch references the Bible. Mm-hmm. So they both play hand in hand together quite nicely. Neither one disproves the other, but the Book of Enoch simply supports the Bible and adds to it in terms of lore and stuff like that. It does absolutely nothing to confuddle or confuse it. Mm-hmm. The only reason it's not included is because, well, you don't really get anything out of it. There's no overall moral message. There's no meaning of life in it. There's just, hey, this is just how things are. This is how things happened. Mm-hmm. And the Bible skims over a lot of that because, at the time, its authors were aware of the Book of Enoch, because that was the book that Noah's great-grandfather had written because of all the things that had happened leading up to the flood. Right. And just for some closing thoughts here, Taylor, honestly, I find it fascinating to study the lore of angels. And they are not perchance sexless beings, but they're capable of reproduction, and I find that to be one of the biggest questions I have. They have no need to reproduce, but they can physically die. Yet, if they die, they still exist in some form and require imprisonment.
So that imprisonment, that comes post-death? Are they not able to face it before?
It seems to me that they have the ability to acquire physical bodies that can die, but they themselves still continue to exist.
Okay.
Which would also be a reason to think about vessels and other things like that on the planet. Things that can get possessed. If demons are simply angels, or if we expand our thoughts and go outside religion, if aliens are these things as well, it really opens a whole can of worms. And there's a whole lot of questions, some of which maybe get answered through this. And there's a lot more questions to be had after I even go through that list of answers. Mm-hmm. It's a very fascinating topic. And I was hoping, now that I've kind of finished all this, to reach out to you, Taylor, and see what else you have to add.
My gosh. I mean, on top of everything I've said, I would just reiterate a little bit more the fact that the parallels that you can associate between angels and demons with other categories or components in society today is fascinating. People look at religion and the Bible, Book of Enoch, and I think they date these things. They put them as ancient history for humanity. And while I'm not a religious man myself, there are things that we can take from those books and apply today to help us understand things a little bit more. I'm not saying you need to live and breathe by the moral code of some of these phrases inside the Bible, but I think we need to examine them a little bit more closely and see with a fine-tooth comb where these things apply today, because I think that those books are still very relevant, and I think that there's a lot of information that we should be looking into, and why the powers to be, governments, who knows what, why are they putting out certain things that seem reminiscent or somehow associated with things in the Bible and with the Book of Enoch, and just kind of question those motives.
And I also find it fascinating with everything that you've just said, that when it comes down to it, humans appear to be the most important species, because even the angels came to humans to ask for forgiveness from God, because we were the ones that could pray and speak directly to God.
Mm-hmm. It's deep. It's really, really deep. You're giving me a lot to think about, because I mean, going into this episode, I had no idea where you're going to go with this. I thought, okay, angelic species, maybe he's going to kind of have like a more of an alien spin on this, because I didn't know anything about your notes going into this. So you have literally blown my mind.
There's alien spins. I didn't even have time to get to that. Spinning wheels, chariots of fire, biblical paintings, stuff like that depict UFOs in the sky. That's a topic for another episode. And there is still different angels and names and stuff to really dig into and look at the things that they've done. And I can't get to that. There's 50 chapters of this Book of Enoch. There's other texts around the biblical time
that's
too.
50 episodes.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot of episodes to have to dive into. The Book of Enoch is an interesting one too, because since it's not so popular, it's also still in ye old English kind of a style too. Its translation hasn't been done a whole lot. So while it's been translated from Hebrew to Greek to Old English to what we have of like these and thys, there's no modern version of it. Mm-hmm. And for me to have to dive into that and really dig out as much as I have, wow, that's a massive task. Mm-hmm. But look, I've just barely scraped the surface. Look how much I got out of it.
Mm-hmm. You got a good amount. You got a damn good amount. Yeah, I got nothing else I can add in there based on what you've told me so far.
Well, that's okay. I'll leave you mine broken. Hopefully our viewers aren't dreading their existence now. Taylor, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into this episode of Cryptid Clues. Again, you can find us on our website, CryptidClues.ca, our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, and our Patreon, where we get ad-free early episodes. And if you want to reach us directly, you can via CryptidClues@gmail.com. But yeah, until next time, thank you so much for being here, Reuben, sharing all that information. Thank you all to our listeners for tuning in. Take care and stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.